The night the squad car rolled into our cul-de-sac, I was barefoot in the kitchen rinsing coffee cups, half listening to the weather report about a cold front, and debating whether to pull the cover over the Lamborghini because the wind always drives dust against the paint out here. Blue and red light flickered across the hallway like a nightclub in slow motion, which is not normal for our quiet HOA suburb where the loudest thing is usually a lawnmower that goes 5 minutes past the allowed time. I stepped onto the porch and saw 2 officers standing at the bottom of my driveway, their car angled behind them, and beside them was Karen, our HOA president, in her navy polo with the embroidered logo, arms crossed, chin high, pointing at my car like it was contraband. Behind her, parked half on the street and half crooked on the curb, was her rusty old van, the one with the fading church bumper sticker and the dented sliding door that screams 2006 and 3 kids with soccer practice. For a second I honestly thought she had called the police because someone had hit her van, but then I followed the line of her finger and realized she was talking about my car, the bright orange Lamborghini I keep spotless and parked in the driveway because my garage is full of tools. The air was that November kind of cold where you can see a little breath, and I remember thinking how ridiculous the whole scene looked, my car sitting under the porch light like a showroom piece, and Karen giving a statement in the dark like she was reporting a burglary. I walked down the driveway slow, hands relaxed, trying to look as unthreatening as a guy with a supercar can look, and said, "Evening, officers, is something wrong?" The taller officer, his name tag said Sanchez, gave me a professional nod and seemed relieved I had shown up calm. The younger one kept his eyes on Karen, probably because she was the one doing all the talking and all the gesturing. Karen turned toward me with this look of victory, the kind she wears at HOA meetings when she quotes a paragraph nobody else bothered to read. "There he is," she said to the officers like she had just delivered the suspect. "That is the owner." Sanchez said, "Sir, we received a call about a dispute regarding a vehicle on the property. We just need to verify ownership and make sure no one is trying to remove it without permission." I looked at my car, then at Karen's van, and something clicked that made my stomach drop and laugh at the same time. I said, "A dispute over which vehicle?" Karen cut in before anyone could answer. "I initiated a corrective exchange under HOA authority," she said, fast and confident. "This residence is displaying an unsuitable vehicle that attracts theft. I offered my vehicle as a replacement. He has not complied, and I do not want the tow to be misinterpreted as theft." I swear to God she said it like she was describing a landscaping issue. I looked at Sanchez to make sure I had heard it right. "You offered your van for my car," I said. "It is a fair community-minded arrangement," she said. "The HOA can require changes that protect the neighborhood image." The younger officer blinked like he was trying not to smile. Sanchez stayed neutral and said, "Sir, do you have paperwork for the vehicle so we can confirm it is yours?" "Yeah," I said, "it is inside, registration, title copy, everything. I can grab it right now." Before I moved I said, "Just so we are clear, nobody is towing anything off my driveway." Sanchez said, "That is why we are here, to keep it from getting to that point." Karen huffed, folded violation papers tighter in her hand, and said, "The board has authority to remove non-compliant displays." She loves the word non-compliant. I ran inside, grabbed the folder from the drawer where I keep house stuff, and on the way back I could hear her explaining to the younger officer how high-value items bring criminals, how someone had messaged her on the neighborhood app about a suspicious truck last month, how all of us had to make sacrifices to keep our community modest. I handed the folder to Sanchez. He shone his flashlight over the registration, matched the VIN on the paper to the plate and to the little plaque at the base of the windshield, checked my license, and nodded. "All right," he said, "this vehicle is clearly yours, current, insured, parked on your property." He turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "you cannot reassign someone else's vehicle, and an HOA cannot force a private swap of vehicles." Karen's jaw tightened. "So you are not going to enforce the rule," she said. "There is no rule to enforce," he said. "This is a civil disagreement about style, not a police matter." She was not satisfied. Because Karen is never satisfied when someone tells her the boundary of her power. Then I need to report him for suspicious activity, she said suddenly, because people do not buy cars like that on remote salaries, and it is my responsibility to keep drugs out of this neighborhood. That sentence hung in the air like a bad smell. Sanchez stopped writing. Do you have any evidence of criminal activity, ma'am? He asked, firm now. She hesitated, then pushed on. I monitor property tax records, she said. He is not declared as a doctor or executive. He should not have that car, it is inconsistent. I could feel my ears get hot. Officer, I said, I work in cybersecurity, I make good money, I have bank paperwork inside if you need it, I paid for the car, nothing illegal here. Sanchez lifted a hand. We do not need your bank statements, he said, ownership is enough. Then he looked back at Karen. Ma'am, making accusations without evidence can get you in trouble, and tying up officers for HOA issues is not appropriate. She should have stopped there. Instead she marched to her van, opened the driver door, dug around in the center console, and pulled out her phone. Fine, she said, loud enough for the neighbors who had started coming onto their porches to hear. I will call a private tow and handle it through the board. If he wants to keep the car he can appeal. Sanchez actually exhaled a laugh through his nose. Ma'am, he said, if a private tow shows up to take a vehicle we have just confirmed belongs to him, we will treat that as an attempt to take property without consent. Do you understand? She froze halfway into the seat of the van. It was obvious at that moment she had not considered that she was the one edging toward a crime. She had built this whole story in her head where the HOA is the government and the rest of us are tenant. I just watched. By the next morning the whole street knew something had happened, though the story had already started to warp. A neighbor texted me asking if I was selling the Lamborghini. Someone else posted on the HOA message board about a police incident related to vehicle theft. I didn't bother replying, but when I walked out to grab the paper, I saw Karen standing across the street, phone in hand, talking to someone in that clipped tone she reserves for her allies on the board. She paused when she saw me and gave a little wave that looked more like a summons than a greeting. I ignored it and went back inside, but I could feel the tension sitting in my chest like static. It wasn't fear, exactly, just that uncomfortable knowledge that I was now part of whatever fantasy she was building. By noon, I got an email from the HOA Compliance Committee. The subject line read, Community Image Violation. It was a form letter, no signature, saying my vehicle may not conform to the neighborhood aesthetic standards, and advising that I seek an approved exchange with a board-approved alternative. The language was so specific it was almost funny. Exchange instead of removal, like they were trying to sound legal without crossing into anything actionable. I called the number at the bottom, which went straight to Karen's voicemail. Her voice said, You've reached Karen from the Maple Ridge HOA. Please leave a message regarding community issues. I hung up. I decided to go straight to the source. The HOA office was a converted garage attached to Karen's house. It used to be her husband's workshop before he moved out. The blinds were down, but her van was parked outside, same dent, same dull paint. I knocked and waited. She opened the door just enough to make it clear I wasn't invited inside. Her eyes flicked toward the street, like she was making sure someone could see us. You can't come here unannounced, she said. This is an administrative space. I said, Karen, I got your email. We both know there's no rule against the car. You just don't like it. She tightened her grip on the door. It's not about what I like, she said. It's about what's appropriate. You're showing off. That's how neighborhoods get targeted. We work hard to keep this community safe. You mean you work hard to keep it boring, I said, before I could stop myself. Her face twitched. You think money gives you immunity, she said quietly. It doesn't. You're not better than us. Then she closed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, someone left a folded sheet of paper under my windshield wiper. It was printed in all caps. Remove vehicle or face towing and legal consequences. I stood in the driveway staring at it, feeling that weird mix of anger and disbelief that comes when reality turns stupid. My neighbor, Steve, the one with the 2 golden retrievers, came jogging up the street and slowed down when he saw me. "You get one too?" he asked. I frowned. "One what?" He pointed toward his own driveway. "Letter. About my fence lighting. Same format, no name. Karen's at it again. He told me she'd been pushing for aesthetic consistency since last summer, after a new family painted their shutters navy blue instead of beige. She'd already fined 3 people for non-conforming decorative items, which included a kid's basketball hoop." Steve chuckled and said, "She's losing it, man. You just happen to have the flashiest target." I wanted to believe it would burn itself out. But the next day, a tow truck actually showed up. I was in my home office on a client call when I heard the low rumble outside. I looked through the blinds and saw a white flatbed truck reversing slowly toward my driveway. I dropped my headset and ran outside, shouting before I even reached the porch, "Stop! Don't touch it!" The driver rolled down his window, looking confused. "You the owner?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah. And you're trespassing." He frowned and showed me the work order on his clipboard. "Maple Ridge HOA," it said at the top. "Vehicle removal per community directive." It listed my address and the last 4 digits of my plate. There was even a fake signature that looked suspiciously like Karen's. I told him the police had already confirmed ownership last night and that if he tried to hook the car, he'd be committing theft. He looked genuinely nervous. "Man, I don't want trouble," he said, putting the truck in park. "Some lady said she was the property manager. She paid the deposit already. Did she give you ID?" I asked. He shook his head. "Nope. Just a name. Karen Whitaker." I called Sanchez, the officer from last night. He answered faster than I expected, probably remembering the case. When I told him what was happening, he said he'd send a unit right away. The tow driver must have heard enough of my end of the call, because he backed out before they even arrived. I didn't blame him. 5 minutes later, the same squad car pulled up, and Sanchez stepped out with a notebook. "Déjà vu," he said dryly. I explained everything, showed him the paper from the windshield, the fake work order, the email. He photographed them all with his phone and sighed. "All right. This is crossing into criminal misrepresentation now," he said. "You want to file a report?" I said yes. He asked for my ID again, took notes, and said he'd stop by Karen's to ask some questions. He warned me not to confront her directly anymore. "People like this," he said, "they build a story where they're the hero. You can't reason with it. You just document." That evening, I watched from my front window as Sanchez knocked on Karen's door. She made him stand outside for nearly 5 minutes before opening. They talked on the porch, him calm, her agitated, hands moving fast. I couldn't hear words, just tone, sharp, defensive, then suddenly pleading. At one point she gestured toward my house, and he held up a hand like he was done listening. When he left, she stayed on the porch for a long minute, staring at the ground like she was recalculating her next move. For a few quiet days, nothing happened. I started to think maybe the police talk had worked. Then the HOA meeting notice showed up. Emergency session, mandatory attendance for homeowners. The agenda item: resolution of vehicle exchange dispute. I almost laughed at the wording but decided to go. I wanted to see how far she'd push it in public. The community hall was just a repurposed maintenance shed with folding chairs. About 20 people showed up. Karen sat at the front table with her binder and microphone, looking composed in that way people do when they're one bad question away from cracking. She called the meeting to order, recited some nonsense about bylaws, and then announced, "As you all know, one of our residents has brought an unsuitable vehicle into the neighborhood, creating safety and equity concerns. The board has proposed a voluntary exchange to resolve this amicably." You could hear murmurs ripple through the room. A woman near the back whispered, "She can't be serious." I stood up and said, I think everyone deserves to hear the whole story, including the part where police told her she had no authority, and the part where she forged a tow order. The room went still. Karen's face turned the shade of someone realizing she might have overplayed her hand. "That's a false accusation," she snapped. "This is not a court." "No," I said, "but it will be one if this keeps up." I filed a report. "There's a case number." Someone asked, "Wait, she really called the cops on a car?" Another neighbor laughed. "What next, ban mail trucks?" The room broke into low chuckles. Karen tried to regain control by reading from her binder, but the noise drowned her out. One of the other board members, an older guy named Tim, finally said, "Karen, maybe we should table this." She glared at him but didn't argue. The meeting ended without a vote, which felt like a small win. When I walked out, a few neighbors patted me on the shoulder, offering quiet support. Steve said, "Don't worry, man. She's losing the neighborhood." Still, as I drove the Lambo to work the next morning, I noticed her van parked 2 blocks over, facing the main road, like she was watching who came and went. It didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like waiting for the next round. The next round came faster than I expected. 3 days after that HOA meeting, I got a knock on my door around 7 in the morning. It wasn't the police this time. It was a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard and an envelope with a gold HOA seal stickered across it like it was an official government document. He introduced himself as Mr. Dalton, representing the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association Legal Committee. His tone was polite but overly formal, like a salesman rehearsing. He handed me the envelope and said, "This is a notice of property review and proposed corrective action. You'll want to read it thoroughly." I asked, "Am I being sued?" He gave a small, awkward laugh. "Not exactly," he said, "just standard procedural notice. Ms. Whitaker requested we make this official." Of course, Karen couldn't resist leveling up. After he left, I opened the envelope at the kitchen counter and read through a 5-page packet full of legal-sounding nonsense. It cited some obscure Covenant 8.4 subsection B about visual harmony and claimed my car's presence created undue socioeconomic disparity. At the bottom, it actually said, "Proposed corrective measure, voluntary trade or sale of offending asset to community designee." Beneath that, in ballpoint pen, Karen had handwritten, "Van currently available." I set the papers down and laughed out loud. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind you let out when you realize someone's crossed from controlling to unhinged. I called the number listed for Mr. Dalton and got a secretary who said, "Oh, he's a paralegal, not an attorney. He drafts compliance documents for the board." That made sense. Karen couldn't afford a real lawyer, so she was using someone who printed forms. I thanked her and hung up. A half-hour later, I forwarded the whole thing to Sanchez with the subject line, "Update. HOA escalation." He replied within the hour, short and to the point, "Keep copies, don't engage directly, we'll note this for record." That told me everything I needed to know. The police were already seeing a pattern. But Karen wasn't done. Around that same time, she started talking to neighbors individually. People would mention in passing that she'd stopped by to check on them, then somehow worked my name into the conversation. One guy said she warned him about possible fraud and luxury property schemes. Another said she hinted that I was behind on taxes. None of it made sense, but it was classic Karen. She weaponized gossip like it was part of her HOA toolkit. The worst part wasn't the rumors themselves, it was the way they made people cautious. I could feel the energy on the street shift. Friendly waves became nods, short chats turned into polite distance. It was subtle but constant, like being slowly erased. A week later, I came home to find a pink notice taped to my door. Final warning, vehicle non-compliance. It included a $500 special assessment fee, and a line saying failure to pay could result in lien action. I called the HOA number and demanded to speak to a full board member, not Karen. That's when I reached him, the same guy who'd tried to calm her down at the meeting. He sounded tired, like he'd been dealing with too many of her calls. "Look," he said, "I don't know what she's sent you, but the board didn't authorize that fine. We've been trying to rein her in. She's acting solo." "So she's forging board letters now?" I asked. "She's creative with wording," he said carefully. "But she's already on thin ice. We had an internal vote scheduled to limit her authority." That gave me an idea. I told him, "If she's misusing her position, you might want the police involved before it turns into liability for the board." There was a long pause before he said, "You might be right." 2 nights later, the inevitable happened. I was in the garage working on the old Mustang I'd been restoring when I heard something outside, a scraping sound, followed by a soft metallic clang. I grabbed a flashlight, stepped out, and saw a figure crouched near the Lambo's rear tire. For a second my brain didn't process it, but then the beam of light caught her hair, that distinctive ash blonde streaked with gray. Karen froze, caught halfway between squatting and standing, holding a key-shaped tool in her hand. "Karen," I said, voice low. "What are you doing?" She straightened, visibly startled but trying to cover it. "Inspecting," she said. "We've had reports of license plate tampering." "At 7:30 at night?" "It's a safety audit," she said, still clutching the tool, which I now saw wasn't a key but one of those little handheld tire deflators. "You're flattening my tire," I said. "That's an accusation," she replied. I took out my phone, opened the camera, and started recording. Her face tightened. "You can't record me," she said sharply. "You're on my property," I said. "So, yeah, I can." She turned abruptly and walked toward her van, muttering something about non-compliant documentation. I didn't stop her. Instead, I texted Sanchez again and sent the video clip. 10 minutes later, he called. "We'll swing by," he said, voice tense but measured. When the police car arrived, Karen was still there, sitting in her van at the end of the cul-de-sac, pretending to scroll her phone. They parked behind her, lights off this time, and went to speak with her first. I watched from my driveway, keeping distance. It wasn't a confrontation, more like a conversation she clearly didn't control. Her gestures slowed, her voice dropped, and finally, she handed over the deflator. After a few minutes, Sanchez walked over to me. "She admits she touched the tire," he said. "Claims she was checking pressure. You want to press charges." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to end this nonsense right then, but another part knew she'd spin it into martyrdom. "Not yet," I said. "Just document it." He nodded. "We already are. But if she comes back on your property, call immediately. We'll move to trespassing." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about control or ego anymore, it was about unraveling. Karen had crossed a line she couldn't walk back from, and she didn't even know it. The following week, I started noticing a white sedan parked a few houses down almost every evening. At first I thought it was just another neighbor's guest, but it was always there, engine idling sometimes, lights off. One night I walked toward it just to check, and as soon as I got within 20 feet, it pulled away slowly. The next morning, Karen posted a message on the HOA group chat titled, "Suspicious Surveillance Vehicle." She claimed, "An unidentified car has been following board members." The irony nearly made me choke on my coffee. She was seeing ghosts now. Meanwhile, Tim called me again. "We're having a private board session," he said quietly. "We're voting on Karen's suspension." "You didn't hear that from me." I told him I'd keep it confidential and thanked him for trying. But apparently, Karen caught wind of the meeting, because that evening she went door to door delivering flyers claiming she was being targeted by corrupt homeowners colluding with law enforcement. The text accused me by name of manipulating public servants. She even attached a blurry screenshot of me standing next to Sanchez's patrol car, captioned "Illegal Coordination." By then, half the neighborhood had lost patience. Someone tore her flyers down by morning, and one of the board members posted a clarification online saying she was acting alone. But Karen doubled down. She filed a harassment claim against me with the HOA itself, which was absurd since she was the HOA. The document looked official, but the signature line was just hers, written twice, once as complainant, once as review officer. That was the final straw. I forwarded everything, the deflation video, the forged letters, the fake citations, to Sanchez and Tim. Within 24 hours, an actual investigator from the city's code enforcement department came to my door. They'd apparently received multiple complaints about abuse of HOA authority from residents, and my documentation tied it all together. The man was calm and professional. "We're looking into potential misuse of association funds and authority," he said. "Your cooperation helps." Later that afternoon, I saw 2 unmarked cars outside Karen's house. Plainclothes officers went inside. For nearly an hour, the blinds stayed closed. Then they walked her out, not in handcuffs yet, but clearly under escort. She looked stunned, like someone had switched the script on her life. The neighbors stood quietly watching. For once, nobody said a word. That night, Tim emailed everyone a formal notice. Effective immediately, Karen Whitaker has been suspended pending investigation. Interim leadership to be appointed. I read it twice, then set my phone down and exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like relief mixed with sadness. She had built her identity on control, and without it, she had nothing left to anchor her. But even then, I knew this story wasn't finished. Investigations take time, and people like Karen don't let go easily. I just didn't know that the next step wouldn't come from the HOA or the police. It would come from her trying to claw her way back in, one more desperate move that would finally cross the line into arrest territory. The next morning started deceptively calm. For the first time in weeks, I opened my curtains without that immediate jolt of anxiety, half expecting to see Karen's van idling at the curb. The street was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm when everyone's waiting to see what's left standing. I made coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to remember what normal felt like. Then my phone buzzed with a notification from the neighborhood app, a new post by someone named Community Advocate. The profile photo was blank, but the writing style was unmistakably hers. Long, self-righteous sentences full of moral language. The post accused certain residents of conspiring with corrupt local officials to destroy the democratic integrity of Maple Ridge. It didn't name me, but it mentioned a resident with a luxury import vehicle who seduced police into harassment. The phrase alone made me nearly spit out my coffee. I could have ignored it, but I knew the danger wasn't the rant itself, it was what came after. Karen always managed to recruit a few sympathizers. People who disliked confrontation but were drawn to authority. Within an hour, a few comments appeared supporting her, suggesting the HOA had been infiltrated, that wealthier homeowners were gentrifying the community. I realized then that she was shifting tactics, reframing herself as a victim of class warfare. It was clever in a twisted way. It bought her sympathy and gave her time. That afternoon, I went for a drive to clear my head, mostly country backroads where I could stretch the Lumbo's legs a little without drawing attention. The engine's hum felt therapeutic, like exhaling tension through motion. But when I came back 2 hours later, there was a piece of cardboard taped to my garage door. Written in thick black marker, "Justice for Karen, expose the fraud." I took a photo before pulling it down. The tape was fresh. Someone had been here recently. I sent the picture to Sanchez with a short message. "She's still at it." He called me almost immediately. "We're aware," he said. "You're not the only one. She's been emailing city officials, claiming we're part of a bribery ring. She even filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs." I asked if that meant she'd get in trouble for false reporting, but he sighed. "Not necessarily. They'll review it. She's making noise, but it's just paper for now." He paused, then added, "Just stay calm. Don't give her anything she can twist into retaliation." It was sound advice, but easier said than done. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Once, when I was taking the trash out, I spotted her van parked 3 houses down again. Same spot, engine running. I couldn't see her face through the windshield, but I knew it was her. I went back inside and locked the door. It hit me then how exhausting this had become, how a single unhinged neighbor could change the way you live in your own home. A few days later, I got a call from Tim. His voice sounded heavier than before. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. "Karen showed up at the board meeting tonight even though she's suspended. She brought a stack of papers and tried to motion for a citizen's audit. When we told her she wasn't recognized, she called the police. Again." I groaned. "What did she even report this time?" "She said we were destroying evidence," he said. "When the officers arrived, she told them she was still the acting president and that we were committing fraud. And they didn't buy it," he said. "They asked to see her suspension notice. She refused, said it was fake. So they checked the case file." He stopped for a moment, then added quietly, "They arrested her, man. Right there in the meeting." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. Even though part of me had expected something like this, hearing it out loud still landed hard. "Arrested for what?" I asked finally. "Obstruction, falsifying documents, harassment, I don't know the exact list. But they took her away in cuffs." For a moment I pictured the scene. Karen in her navy polo, arguing to the end, clutching her binder full of printed bylaws. The thought didn't make me happy, it made me tired. She had spent so much energy building this imaginary empire of rules and punishments that she'd managed to trap herself inside it. Over the next few days, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter somehow. The same people who used to avoid eye contact now waved again. A few even stopped by to talk. Steve came over with beers one evening and said, "You must feel vindicated." I shrugged. "I mostly feel sorry for her," I said. She really believed she was protecting something. Still, the story didn't end neatly. A few weeks later, I got a subpoena in the mail. I was listed as a witness in the case. It turned out that her arrest had uncovered more than anyone expected. During the investigation, they found that she had been writing checks from the HOA's maintenance account to consultants who didn't exist. The money, not a huge amount but enough, had gone to a prepaid card registered under her name. Apparently, when she realized she was being investigated, she'd tried to justify the spending as community improvement outreach. The Lumbo situation had been her smokescreen, a distraction to make herself look like the crusader instead of the culprit. I testified in a small courtroom downtown. The judge was patient but firm, letting her speak when her turn came. She didn't have a lawyer, she insisted on representing herself. Her opening statement was a rambling speech about corruption and elitism, accusing me of manipulating city officials and bribing police officers with luxury influence. When she cross-examined me, she asked if I thought my car made me better than other people. I said, "No, it just means I work in tech and like cars." The judge had to remind her twice to stay on topic. In the end, she was found guilty of filing false documents and misusing HOA funds. The sentence wasn't harsh: probation, restitution, mandatory counseling, but it was enough to remove her from any leadership roles permanently. When the gavel fell, she stood there motionless, staring at the floor. Afterward, I saw her once more. It was a gray afternoon a few months later, late winter. I was walking back from the mailbox when her van rolled slowly past, looking more rusted than ever. She was behind the wheel, window cracked, no music, no phone in hand. When she saw me, she hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Not friendly, not apologetic, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. That was the last time I saw her. Months later, a new family moved into Karen's old house. Young couple, quiet, friendly. They tore down the HOA office sign that had been screwed into the garage wall and turned the space back into a workshop. The first weekend they moved in, the husband asked if the neighborhood was pretty strict. I told him, not anymore. He grinned and said, "Good, because we're planning to repaint the shutters bright blue." I laughed, thinking of Karen's old war on color, and said, "Do it. They'll look great." That night, I took the Lamborghini out for a short drive. Not to show off, just to remind myself how it felt to enjoy something without guilt. As I drove past the rows of tidy lawns and porch lights, I noticed the reflection of the car's orange paint on the windows, a warm glow bouncing across the houses like sunset fire. For once, nobody glared, nobody complained. It was just another piece of the neighborhood. When I pulled back into the driveway, I let the engine idle for a second before turning it off. The sound faded into the quiet hum of crickets. For the first time since that crazy evening with the flashing police lights, the air felt calm, ordinary, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, just settles in. I leaned against the hood, looked down the street, and realized how thin the line is between order and chaos, between pride and paranoia. Karen wasn't evil. She was lonely, convinced that control was the same thing as purpose. Maybe that's why, even after everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. She wanted meaning. She just reached for it in the worst way possible. The irony still makes me smile. She tried to trade her rusty van for my Lamborghini, convinced she was saving the neighborhood from vanity, and in the end it was vanity that ruined her. I don't tell the story much anymore, except when people ask why there's no HOA president. Then I just say, long story. We had one, but she drove herself out of power. And usually that's enough. The HOA eventually restructured. Tim became interim president and rewrote the bylaws to prevent unilateral actions like hers. We even started hosting quarterly barbecues. Informal, neighborly, no votes or minutes required. The first one felt awkward, everyone unsure how to act without the old order dictating things. But by the second, kids were running around with chalk and frisbees, someone brought a karaoke machine, and the air felt easy again. One evening, as the sun set over the cul-de-sac, Steve leaned against my fence and said, "So, keeping the Lumbo?" I smiled. "After all that, it's staying right where it is." He laughed. "Good. It's kind of the neighborhood mascot now." Sometimes I still think about how it all started. One person's obsession with control spiraling until it touched everyone around her. There's a strange fragility to suburban peace. It takes so little to disturb it. A car, a rumor, an ego. But it also takes surprisingly little to restore it. A few honest conversations, a sense of humor, people deciding they'd rather live next to each other than fight each other. A few months went by, and I started to think that the whole thing had finally become just another neighborhood story, one of those tales people tell new residents over drinks, like a local legend. Did you hear about the lady who tried to trade her van for a Lamborghini? It had that urban myth quality, half ridiculous and half believable, depending on how you told it. I kept to myself mostly, focused on work and fixing up the Mustang in the garage, and I stopped checking the HOA emails entirely. The quiet felt earned. Then one afternoon, out of nowhere, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The voice was soft, deliberate, and oddly familiar. "This is Karen Whitaker," she said. "I'd appreciate a chance to talk, just for closure. No hostility." There was a pause, like she was waiting for me to cut her off, then she added, "It's about something left unresolved with the board. Please call back." I didn't respond right away. Part of me thought it was bait, some last attempt to reassert control. But curiosity got the better of me. 2 days later, I called her back. She sounded calm, too calm. "Thank you for returning my call," she said. "I just wanted to make things right." I said, "Karen, there's nothing left to fix. It's over." She sighed. "Not for me. I've been attending counseling, like the court ordered. They say accountability is part of recovery." I wanted to apologize. I didn't know what to say, so I let her keep talking. She told me she'd been working part-time at a local hardware store, that she'd started volunteering at her church again. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was weary. After a few minutes she said, "You know, I didn't hate you. I just couldn't stand feeling invisible. That car, it made me feel like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood anymore. I said quietly, "You could have just said that." "I know," she said. "But I thought if I enforced order, I'd matter again." We talked for maybe 10 minutes total. By the end, I told her I accepted the apology, even if I didn't fully understand it. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Like I'd put a lid on something that had been rattling in the back of my mind. But 3 days later, everything took a strange turn. A neighbor texted me a photo of my driveway. My car was there, fine, but in front of it, blocking the exit, was that same dented van, the one with the faded church sticker. The message said, "Hey man, what's going on? Is that her van?" I stepped outside and there it was, parked at a perfect angle so I couldn't leave without moving it. The driver's seat was empty, but the engine was still warm. I called Sanchez immediately. He said, "Stay inside. We'll send a unit." The officers arrived within 10 minutes. While they were checking the van, Karen appeared from the sidewalk carrying a file folder. She looked thinner, older. When she saw the police, her face flickered with something like relief. "Oh good," she said. "I wanted this to be official." Sanchez stepped forward. "Karen, you can't block someone's driveway. That's trespassing." "I'm not blocking," she said. "I'm repossessing." He stared at her. "Repossessing what?" "The car," she said simply. "It was part of an agreement." He didn't follow through. I stepped forward, my voice sharper than I meant. "What agreement?" She opened the folder and showed a typed document with 2 signatures at the bottom, one hers, one forged version of mine. The text said I had voluntarily agreed to exchange vehicles in the spirit of neighborhood solidarity. It even listed her van's VIN number and my car's make and model. Sanchez took the paper, examined it, and then looked at me. "This your signature?" I shook my head. "Not even close." He turned back to her. "Karen, forging a signature on a legal document is a crime. You understand that?" Her calm cracked for the first time. "No," she said, "it's symbolic. It's what should have happened. I'm not stealing, I'm correcting." "Ma'am, you need to move your vehicle now," Sanchez said. She crossed her arms, trembling. "You can't keep protecting him forever. The truth will come out. He made a mockery of me. Of all of us." "Karen," I said quietly, "please. Just go home." She looked at me with something almost pleading in her eyes, then at the Lamborghini behind me. "You don't deserve it," she whispered. "You never did." Sanchez motioned to his partner, who gently took her by the elbow. She didn't resist at first, but as they guided her toward the patrol car, she began to shake her head and mutter, "It was supposed to be fair." Then, suddenly, she twisted free and ran toward her van, shouting, "I'll prove it!" They caught her before she could start the engine. Sanchez had to physically take the keys from her hand. This time they did cuff her. The sight made my stomach twist. Not satisfaction, just the sadness of watching someone collapse under their own delusions. As they drove away, I stood in the middle of the driveway staring at the empty space she'd left. The sun was setting, washing the street in orange light. For the first time, I noticed how quiet it was. No neighbors watching, no whispers, just silence. That night, Sanchez called to debrief. "She's being held overnight," he said. "They're going to evaluate her. It looks like she's had some kind of breakdown." He paused. "You'll probably need to give another statement, but after this, I doubt she'll come back." He was right. She didn't. A week later, Tim came by with a manila envelope. "We had a special meeting," he said. "Official vote to terminate her HOA membership permanently. She can't serve on any committee or attend meetings." Inside the envelope was the new bylaw amendment and a letter from the city confirming that her case was being diverted to a mental health program. "She's getting treatment," he said softly. "It's sad, but maybe it's what she needed all along." After that, the neighborhood truly began to heal. The rumors stopped. The HOA's tone changed. They started focusing on small improvements instead of policing appearances. A few neighbors even approached me to apologize for believing her earlier stories. I told them not to worry about it. Everyone wants to feel like they're on the side of order. It's just that some people mistake control for safety. Spring came, and with it the first real sense of peace. I spent weekends tuning the Mustang, and sometimes I'd park both cars side by side in the driveway just to remind myself that I could. Nobody complained, nobody stared. Life settled back into its small, comfortable rhythms. But one evening, I got a letter, not from Karen this time, but from her sister. She thanked me for not pressing charges earlier and said Karen was living with her upstate, focusing on recovery. She talks about the neighborhood often, the letter said. She says she wishes she could have just been a neighbor instead of a warden. I read that line twice. It stayed with me. Because beneath all the absurdity, that's really what it was about. A woman trying so hard to prove her value that she lost the ability to simply belong. A few weeks later, I donated to a local mental health foundation in her name. I didn't tell anyone, not even Steve. It wasn't about absolution. It just felt like the right closing gesture. One afternoon that summer, I was waxing the Lambo when a little kid from down the street stopped at the end of the driveway, wide-eyed. "Cool car," he said. I smiled. "Thanks, kiddo." He squinted at the hood. "My mom said a lady once tried to steal it. Is that true?" I laughed. "Something like that," I said. "But she didn't get far." He nodded, satisfied, and ran off. As I packed up the cleaning supplies, I looked at the reflection in the paint, the house, the trees, the fading sky, and felt a strange mix of peace and perspective. The car wasn't just a symbol of status anymore. It was a reminder of how easily people project their insecurities onto things they don't understand. To me, it was just metal and motion. To Karen, it had been everything she feared losing. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. Somewhere, miles away, she was probably sitting on another porch, maybe listening to crickets, maybe thinking about all the lines she crossed without realizing it. I hoped she found something resembling calm. The neighborhood moved on. The van disappeared eventually, sold or scrapped, nobody knew. But sometimes, on windy nights, when the leaves rattle down the street, I can almost hear that old rusty engine in my memory, idling at the edge of my driveway like a ghost of the past. It doesn't scare me anymore. If anything, it reminds me that even the strangest conflicts have roots in something deeply human: fear, pride, loneliness. And once you see that, it's hard to stay angry. In the end, I didn't lose anything. Not the car, not my peace, not my sense of home. What I gained was perspective, and a story that still sounds too ridiculous to be true, even though every word of it happened right here on this quiet street under the same old porch light. The following winter, the world around me seemed to slow down. The air grew crisp, the lake froze in the distance, and the neighborhood slipped into that quiet rhythm where nothing urgent ever seemed to happen. It was the first year since the ordeal that the house actually felt like home again. I'd gotten used to waking up to stillness instead of tension, the sound of the furnace kicking on instead of police radios outside my window. My life had settled into something I hadn't realized I missed: routine. I'd go to work, come back, cook simple dinners, read before bed. Sometimes, on particularly calm nights, I'd sit on the porch just to hear the wind move through the trees. It's strange how peace, after enough chaos, can feel like luxury. One Saturday morning in late January, I received an email from the housing nonprofit asking if I'd be willing to help with a new awareness campaign about property scams. They wanted to make a short documentary, something to show at community meetings and online, to warn people how easily things like mine could happen. I hesitated at first. Reliving everything again on camera didn't sound appealing. But then I thought about that woman at the seminar who'd thanked me for making her parents feel less foolish. Maybe there was value in putting a human face to the warning. I agreed. A week later, a small crew showed up at my house. A director, a cameraman, and a sound tech with a fuzzy microphone that looked like a tiny gray animal. They were professional but kind, asking careful questions about lighting and comfort. The director, a woman named Lila, had this calm, steady energy that made it easier to talk. We filmed most of the interview in the living room. She asked me to walk through what happened, from the night I came home to the court hearings and finally the resolution. I told it plainly, the way I'd lived it. There was no need to dramatize. It was unbelievable enough on its own. When we finished, she said softly, "You know, most people talk about these things with anger. You talk about it with empathy. That's rare." That night, after they packed up, I sat alone on the couch thinking about what she'd said. I hadn't always been empathetic. At first, I'd wanted justice, even revenge. I'd wanted to see someone pay for the invasion of my life. But over time, anger had turned into something quieter, something resembling understanding. I'd come to see that most people's worst choices weren't born from malice but from desperation or fear. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. And sometimes explanation is all the closure you get. A few months later, the documentary premiered at a community hall downtown. The room was filled with homeowners, realtors, and a few local officials. The video wasn't flashy. Just interviews, a few cutaway shots of the house, and statistics about housing scams. But watching my own face on screen describing that night still made my heart race. When it ended, people clapped politely, and several came up to talk afterward. One man said he'd nearly fallen for a similar fake listing 2 months earlier, but had remembered my story from an online article. "You saved me from losing 10 grand, he said, shaking my hand. I didn't know what to say except, "I'm glad you double-checked." That small moment stayed with me. For the first time, I realized that something good had come out of the chaos. My story had turned into a cautionary tale that might spare others the same pain. It felt strangely redemptive, like reclaiming something that had once been stolen from me. A few weeks later, while organizing files on my laptop, I found the old folder where I'd kept photos from before the incident. The listing pictures, the legal papers, even screenshots from the fake Maple Estates website. I almost deleted them. Then I stopped. Instead, I renamed the folder Perspective and left it there. Not as a wound, but as a reminder of what I'd learned. Around that time, I got an email from her again. It was brief. "Saw the documentary. You told it fairly. Thank you for not making me the villain." I read it twice, feeling something shift inside me. She was right. I hadn't made her the villain, not because I wanted to protect her, but because that's not how real life worked. There weren't villains and heroes here. Just people, each trying to survive their own storms, sometimes colliding in the worst possible ways. Later that spring, I finally decided to sell the house. Not because I couldn't stay, but because it felt like the end of a long chapter. The place had been good to me, but it carried too many ghosts, even if they were quiet ones now. I listed it through a reputable agent, disclosed everything, and watched as couples came to tour it, each one imagining their future where my past had been. When the sale closed, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. Before I left for good, I walked through every room one last time. The walls still bore faint marks from where paintings had hung, the floor creaked in the same spot near the hallway. I stood in the living room, where that first confrontation had happened, and tried to remember what it felt like that night. Shock, disbelief, fear, but it was distant now, like a scene from someone else's life. I opened the back door and let the breeze roll through, carrying the last of it away. I moved into a smaller place a few towns over, a modern condo with secure entry, cameras, and neighbors who minded their own business. It was different, cleaner, simpler. Sometimes I missed the sound of the old house settling at night, but mostly I liked the quiet predictability of this new space. A blank page. One evening, months after I'd settled in, I got a postcard in the mail. There was no return address, just an image of a small brick building with a garden out front. On the back was a short message. "We opened the shelter last month. Thank you for helping me believe in second chances." I stared at it for a long time before setting it on my desk next to the Lisbon map, which I'd framed and brought with me. The past had found a way to end gracefully after all. That postcard became a small piece of my morning ritual. Every day I'd see it sitting there, a reminder that not all consequences are bad. Some things break and rebuild stronger. I thought about how, if you had told me 2 years earlier that I'd end up corresponding with the woman who once lived in my house without permission, I'd have laughed. But life has a way of softening edges you once thought were permanent. A few months later, Lila, the documentary director, called to say their short film had been picked up for a national housing awareness campaign. "It's getting traction," she said. "People really connected with your story. Especially the part where you said, 'Home isn't just a place, it's a promise between you and the world.'" I'd forgotten saying that, but hearing it quoted back made me smile. Maybe it was true. Maybe we don't own places so much as we agree to care for them for as long as they'll have us. That fall, I was invited to a small panel discussion about housing fraud prevention. They wanted me to share my experience alongside law enforcement officers and legal experts. During the Q&A, someone asked if I ever regretted not pressing charges against the woman. I thought for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "Because punishment wouldn't have given me back what I lost. Healing did. And sometimes you have to choose between being right and being at peace." The room went quiet for a beat before people started nodding. It wasn't a clever line, but it was honest. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, a young man approached me. He looked nervous, maybe mid-20s. "I moved into a house that turned out to belong to someone else last year," he said quietly. "We got scammed the same way. Hearing you talk about forgiveness, it helps. I thought everyone hated people like me." I told him what I'd learned the hard way, that most people just want to belong somewhere, and sometimes the search for belonging takes them through the wrong door. He smiled, and I realized that maybe that was the real ending to all this, not the courtroom or the restitution, but the way the story kept rippling outward, softening other edges besides mine. On the anniversary of the night I came home to find police lights bouncing off my windows, I drove past the old neighborhood out of curiosity. The house looked different now. The new owners had painted it pale blue and added flower boxes beneath the windows. A child's bike lay on the front lawn. Life had filled it again. I didn't stop. I just smiled, drove past slowly, and let it fade in the rearview mirror. When I got back to my condo, I brewed coffee and sat on the balcony watching the sunset. The city lights began to glow in the distance, faint and steady. I thought about everything that had happened, the intrusion, the chaos, the strange friendship that followed, and realized I wouldn't change any of it. It had taught me things no comfort ever could. How fragile ownership is, how resilient people can be, and how sometimes the best revenge against chaos is simply rebuilding quietly and refusing to live in fear. As the sky turned from gold to blue, I set my mug down and leaned back in my chair. Somewhere out there, I imagined her closing up the shelter for the night, checking on her kids, maybe feeling that same sense of calm. We'd both found our way back to something resembling home. Not the same kind, but enough. And in the end, that was all either of us had been trying to find from the very beginning.